I was immensely curious how Resident Evil 7 was going to turn out. This game was shrouded in mystery for me, and every bit of gameplay I saw made it look like it was trying its best to emulate PT. So when I finally got my hands on it on release date, I was both surprised and disappointed when I found out what it had actually become. Resident Evil 7 is the newest addition to the long list of Resident Evil games, and since the series has started, these games have gone down so many different rabbit holes and tried so many different things that no one even knows what Resident Evil is anymore. RE7 is no different in this regard. For the first time in the series, the game switches the perspective up to first person and opts for less of the survival and more of the horror. This is the first point I'd like to touch on in regards to RE7. From the initial reveal trailer, it was obvious that Capcom was aiming to try something different with this game. The new focus on horror was a bold choice, and I was looking forward to seeing what Capcom could do with this new directive. Sadly, Capcom's attempt at making a horror game didn't pan out so well for them. Before I say anything else, let me get this out of the way. Resident Evil 7's first hour is phenomenal. The game does a fantastic job of establishing a skin-crawling atmosphere while resorting to very little jump scares or other horror cliches. The Baker House is an absolute nightmare that you don't want to spend more than a second in, and every step you take forward fills you with dread and discomfort. For any horror fanatic, this first hour will have you reveling. Unfortunately, this is just the first hour. There is a clear dividing point between the first hour and the rest of this game, and once you cross it, all tension and terror is dissolved almost entirely. Past this point, RE7 turns into just another Amnesia clone where you've got to duck around corners and close doors behind you to avoid the big scary mega monster. The immaculate, almost masterful atmosphere of the first hour is dropped entirely, and from this point forward you're going to be hard-pressed to be frightened or even mildly spooked with anything you come across. This is also where the actual video game kicks in. The first thing the game has you do is play Amnesia Light with Jack Baker, and I've got to say that these sections almost ruined my entire experience. Playing Avoid the big scary invincible monster was never fun and never has been fun. There's no tension, there's no depth, it's just wait for a guy to patrol past you, then sneak behind him when his back is turned. That is every encounter with every big, bad, unkillable monster in this game. Having to sit behind the table and wait for Jack to turn a corner so I can continue to play the video game was unbearable. Thankfully, this only occurs a handful of times, but having this be the first real chunk of gameplay you experience was almost enough to get me to shut the game off entirely. As I said before though, this game isn't made up entirely of these sections. If RE7 were just another Outlast or Alien Isolation, then I wouldn't have even bothered finishing it. Once you pass a certain point that I'll avoid mentioning due to spoilers, you'll find that the game opens up and becomes far more of an enjoyable experience. Of course, it's not really a horror game, or really even a survival game at this point, but I still found myself having fun once I felt as if I had some sort of agency in this world. Being able to fend things off and working through new areas was exciting and engaging in its own way. Though, while the game isn't made up of only Outlast-esque situations, that doesn't mean that everything after these parts is pure bliss. The shooting and movement in this game weren't exactly enjoyable. Resident Evil games have always been known to feel clunky, and RE7 follows suit. Only, this time the game is in first person. Clunky third-person controls can be managed, and oftentimes it isn't that big of a deal. But having the player experience this in first person emphasizes the clunkiness in a way that makes the whole game feel not quite right. Ethan constantly feels as if he's running through mud, whereas all of your enemies will be moving swiftly through the breeze without a care in the world. These two things combined made combat in this game unnecessarily frustrating. Having such limited mobility against such agile enemies resulted in the primary way of fighting things to be running away, taking a pot shot as they run up to you, and then running away to repeat this process over again. Not exactly super engaging stuff. Not to mention that, even outside of combat, movement just feels off. You never get moving as fast as you want to, and maneuvering through this world will oftentimes feel like a chore. RE7 doesn't control horribly, but it doesn't feel good by any means. One of the better parts of Resident Evil 7 though was the mystery surrounding everything. RE7 does a good job of showing enough to get you to ask questions, but not enough to overwhelm you and to ruin any sense of intrigue. From the word go, I was immediately interested in what was going to happen in the Baker House, and what had happened to Mia. Up until the final couple of hours, I was always eager to keep searching for answers. Every cutscene or character interaction was a joy due to getting to learn more about the world and about the insanity going on around you. And the way this game drip feeds you information was almost addicting. As for the actual story itself, it was serviceable. While the game initially starts off with an incredible amount of mystery and intrigue, as you found out more and more, it all sort of falls flat. The last half of this game, in general, was very underwhelming and felt extremely bloated. While you do get answers as to what's happening and why the Baker House is as insane as it is, none of the answers feel fulfilling or interesting. In fact, almost the entirety of this game's story is sort of swept under the rug for a much more uninteresting and lackluster story in the back half. This leads me into probably the biggest negative that I found with this game, and that was the pacing. Resident Evil 7 has a serious pacing issue that ends up souring almost the whole experience. The game flows fine up until the last couple of hours, where that entirely separate story I mentioned shows up, and the game falls into the same trap that Alien Isolation fell into a few years back. To put it simply, Resident Evil 7 felt like it should have ended at least 4 separate times during the last couple of hours. Had the game ended where it seemed most logical to end it, then there would have been just enough mystery to get you talking about the ending, without just drawing back the curtain and revealing every single dirty detail. Instead, Resident Evil does just that, which leads to the bloated final act. Now, since there's a bloated back half, then all of a sudden the middle section now feels underdeveloped, as a more developed midsection would have made the longer ending feel justified and natural. Essentially, what ended up happening with this game is that they didn't commit to having either a short game that gets you asking questions, or a long game that leaves you fulfilled at the end. What we end up with instead is a final act that completely unravels the entire game and leads to the player ending with a bad taste in their mouth. Resident Evil 7 is a flawed experience, but not a completely unenjoyable one. Honestly, this game is worth experiencing for just the first hour alone. Sure, what comes after that is middling at best, but there's something here for everyone. Resident Evil fans will find solace in the harder difficulties, and newcomers will be able to have fun going on the Baker's Wild Ride. Overall, Resident Evil 7 is a 3 out of 5. The obnoxious Amnesia Light sections and the horrid pacing were tough to move past, but I ultimately ended up being able to enjoy this game as a whole due to the stellar first hour and the intense mystery surrounding the Baker family.